Hey there, howdy, how's it going? So, for you, it has been a mere 2 days since my last upload, as usual. For me, it's been like a week and a half since I've recorded one of these things, because I went on vacation. So you might notice the redder complexion, the fact that I haven't shaved in a while. So let me see if I can get back in this saddle and start talking about the things that are going around in my head. Today, I wanted to talk about realism and why it's a bad word. So there's this idea in both game design and in the way that people run games, the way that people make rulings and such, that the rules of an RPG should more or less reflect real life. And that works for some RPGs. I think it is a bad thing to do for D&D in general. And this is kind of regardless of which edition you're running. And by the way, the sun is like right there. So I'm trying to dodge it at the moment. Sun bad. Sun very bad. I think it's a bad move for D&D because D&D is a sort of like fantasy power, power fantasy, epic, whatever it is that you're trying to do with D&D. There's a few different problems that are going to arise if you try to apply the idea of realism to anything that happens in it. Number one, you'll start to notice that the rules of the game, the actual written rules, and not talking about like these edge cases where the DM needs to make a ruling and such. Not talking about those. I'm talking about the actual rules of the game don't reflect realism at all. Like they have almost no basis in real life. The way combat works in D&D, it basically doesn't have any kind of real life representation. You want to talk about, I think I did a video on opportunity attacks. Yes, I did. I did a video on opportunity attacks because of how weird they are. The turn-based movement it creates a lot of sort of narrative dissonance. So it's hard to imagine what the battle actually looks like in terms of like the narrative because of the way that turn-based movement and actions and everything works. And that's fine. You can ignore that part of the game. You can just sort of hand wave it, say, it's because it's a game. There's this marriage of like what is happening in the narrative versus what is happening as a game. And that's fine. You can do that. You can do that in any edition of D&D. And in fact, you have to do that in nearly every RPG. The problem arises when you start thinking like, well, could a real person do the thing that this player is trying to do? And the issue there is that the characters that are being portrayed here are not real people. And they shouldn't be treated like real people. They should be treated like, epic fantasy heroes. Because that's most of the time what they are supposed to be. Now, that's not to say that they should always be capable of, legendary feats. When I say epic fantasy heroes, I don't mean that everyone is a Hercules. Not everyone is going to be able to, collapse mountains with a smash. Not everyone is going to be able to wrestle the dragon that is, 100 times their size, barehanded, and expect to come out on top. But they should be allowed to attempt. They should be allowed to try. I think those kinds of feats may be above like low-level characters, but once you get the numbers, you should be allowed to try. And things that would be absolutely foolish to even attempt in real life should be the kinds of things that D&D characters do on the regular. For example, sliding down the banister of a staircase, swinging on chandeliers, the kind of like bold attempts to swindle the bad guys with outlandish statements. Anyone who's ever had a bard in their party knows what I'm talking about. These kinds of things that just would not work in real life. There's absolutely no way. Like the chances of them working out in a way that is better than just overwhelming with military might, is so minuscule. And it's a reason why real life is often, not always, but often not as interesting as the stories that we tell. But it does work out sometimes in real life. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. And because these are epic fantasy heroes, it should be something that they get to attempt to do, to create the kinds of interesting moments. If you've ever studied history and like the kinds of like weird anecdotes and like crazy stories that individuals have done throughout human history, like you realize that sometimes you roll well and sometimes you get away with doing this crazy, stupid stuff. It works sometimes. It should work more often for player characters because it's more interesting if they do. Now, as it pertains specifically to 5th edition, you will notice that things like carrying capacity, running speed, jump distance, things like that, they actually don't scale to peak human capabilities. We have professional athletes today that exceed what a D&D character actually can do without spells. Which means that they are like beyond level 20 in real life. And that probably shouldn't exist, right? Yeah, I think you'd be with me on that, right? Level 20 should be like beyond normal human abilities. Because at that point, you truly are a legendary epic fantasy hero. And so I think there should be more of a push amongst dungeon masters to allow players to try things that perhaps the rules don't necessarily allow. In particular, and here's the problem. Here's the real problem. People will use that as an excuse because what I'm about to say and what I've interrupted myself in saying. Let me just say it. You should probably allow your non-casters to get away with more shit than you probably do. You know, non-casters have so few tools in 5th edition that they need to be allowed to sort of like, stretch their creative muscles, come up with innovative solutions that rely on, say, skill checks or ability checks or what have you, or maybe let us call it liberal interpretations of class of features, and allow them to do things that the rules pretty much don't say that they can do. These are the things that you should try to allow, specifically because non-casting characters in 5th edition have very little going for them. Like, they're not going to catch up with the spellcasters, even if you do this. But what people are going to interpret this as, and the reason why I hesitate to say this without any qualifications, is that they see that as like a solution. Like, oh, well, non-casters can just be more creative, and that way they can keep up with spellcasters. Well, that's not actually how that works, and my window's fogging up, and I'm not sure why. Anyways, it's weird. And that's not true. Because for two reasons. The spellcasters can be just as creative as the marshals can. And then they also have spells on top of that. Like, if creativity doesn't work, they can still cast their spells, and just the rules say it works. Here's the mechanics to make it work if the DM doesn't want to let you be that creative. Also, it creates an atmosphere of Mother May I, which is, I think, unhealthy for a game like Dungeons and Dragons. If every time you have to say, DM, can I do this thing that I have envisioned in my head? I have no rules for it, but, it is a game run by a human, and so I am asking you for permission to attempt this cool thing that I have thought of. Every time you have to do that, it's asking permission to do a cool thing. And I don't like that. That rubs me really the wrong way. I feel like a game where you're meant to be doing cool things all the time should have a mechanical framework that facilitates doing cool things within the realm of the rules. Because you don't need the book. You don't need to pay $60 for the player's handbook to say, can I do a cool thing? And for the DM to say, yeah, roll a 10 up. That anyone can do that. You don't need a rule set to do that. And so that I see as a failure of the rules. Every time you have to go outside what the rules say, that's a failure of the rules to accommodate what is going on in your campaign. Now, it's unreasonable to expect an RPG to always cover every possibility. The fact that, the fourth edition page 42 exists. The page 42, if you are not aware, is the page where the rules in fourth edition, the page 42 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, has like charts and tables for coming up with skill checks that aren't covered by the rest of the rules. It's like, if all the other rules fail, here's how to figure out the math. The fact that that exists shows that, like, even in a game as rigorously defined as fourth edition is, which is actually, it is what it is. I'm not gonna make commentary on that. Even in that game, like, you're gonna have instances of that. Those rules exist for a reason. That kind of ruling, or that kind of support for actions that the rules do not cover, is kind of lacking in fifth edition. I'm not gonna say it doesn't exist, but it kind of doesn't exist. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm getting at? It's like, it's barely there. That kind of support is barely there. And even where it is, it doesn't really work as well as it's supposed to. So, I'm not saying it shouldn't ever happen. It must, like, because the narrative aspect of RPGs is such that the rules can't possibly anticipate every eventuality. But the more often it happens, the more the rules have failed you. Some failure is to be expected, but a lot, like, if it's happening every session, that's an indicator that you're probably running a system that isn't suiting your needs. And it might be time to find a better system, or not even a better system, because this could happen in any system. It might be time to find a game that better suits the needs of the campaign that you are running. That, I think, is a better way to put it. And this goes back to my previous statements about, finding the right game for the campaign that you are running and not using D&D for everything. Because I think using D&D for everything kind of hurts the RPG industry as a whole. There's a lot of really good games out there for a lot of different genres, but that's a whole other thing. I wanted to talk about realism. You should not use the standard of, like, what could a real person do to determine what your player characters can do, because they are not real people. They are epic fantasy heroes. And let them be epic fantasy heroes. Let them go, leap across the chasm that no normal human could attempt to leap. But the jumping rules say you can only jump exactly this far. So what? So what? Let them have the cool moment. So, anyways, that's my rant. It's a little bit aimless. Let me tell you something, let me pull back the curtain a bit. I don't usually think about exactly what I'm going to say when I do these videos. I thought I was going to talk about realism, and then I started talking about mechanics for covering rules that aren't in the book. It's a little bit of both, I guess. But anyways, yeah. Hopefully I'll come up with something better for next time, yeah? Something a little bit more focused. But yeah, don't use realism as a standard for what player characters can do.